Okay then, time to count down 15 of the reasons why I think that Warlords of Draenor is going to be better than Mists of Pandaria. Obviously, Warlords of Draenor isn't perfect, there are definitely problems in places, but for now, let's just talk about this. I will probably have a video about some of the pitfalls sometime in the near future. So without further ado, let's get into the meat of the video. Alright, so let's talk about dungeon difficulty. This is something that I think the community as a whole has definitely found to be a rather hot topic, and I think they've actually handled things very well in this expansion. Now I'm really glad that they have, on the whole, decided to make dungeons harder this time round. Don't worry though, the heroics will feel sort of like a nice mix between Wrath of the Lich King and then Cataclysm in terms of difficulty. Also, do bear in mind that healers will not face the same mana regen problems that plagued the first tier of Cataclysm, especially when you were going around in dungeon gear. That stuff was pretty painful. Now, if you are okay with Mists of Pandaria heroics, well, the Warlords of Draenor level 100 normals should fit that niche pretty decently for you. Now, the difference between a MoP heroic and a Warlords of Draenor heroic is actually massive. In Warlords, you do need to pay attention to the mechanics of the fights. You know, you'll be interrupting things, you'll have to maybe AoE down a bunch of mobs, or well, I don't know, just kill a mob, interrupt something, not stand in the fire, etc. There's loads of just things going on. There's a lot of mechanical depth in these fights, which is really cool, and I think that actually it's going to be a very good learning tool that should benefit the raiding scene quite a bit. Now, overall, these, you know, sort of mechanical improvements have really resulted in me just enjoying my time in the heroics of Warlords of Draenor. I've been beta testing them quite a lot on various classes, so yeah, so far it's in a pretty good state. Now, one thing that is worth mentioning though is that the beta currently scales us to the lowest possible item level that you could get into these heroics at, so they will likely just be a tad easier on live, because the chances are that you'll be doing them in slightly better gear. Now, they've also mitigated the potential downsides of the harder heroics by gating LFD for heroics behind a silver proving ground medal, and they've also made it so that people can jump straight from normal level dungeon gear right into LFR. This means that people who don't really like doing that more hard, coordinated content don't actually have to. That's good for them, and it's good for the people who do want to do that content, because they're not going to be paired up with people who don't want to be there, or at least it should be better in that regard. Then also, challenge modes are actually a little bit better. They have basically changed it so that there's a chance of getting some LFR quality gear at the end, even before the LFR opens up. If you are one of the people who really enjoy doing Cataclysm heroics near enough at launch with your guild, then this is basically made for you. You're going to be able to get some nice gear going, you know, doing these challenge modes with your buddies, and it should be a lot of fun. I'm really happy that that kind of content is back in the game in a way that doesn't force people through it, because I don't think the Cataclysm heroics pre-nerfs were really suited for PUG groups. So yeah, there you go, dungeon difficulty is basically in a much better stage than it's been in Mists of Pandaria, and hopefully this is just going to have lots of great effects throughout the whole game, and it's something that I'm really positive about, perhaps one of the best changes that they have made. This next point is perhaps a little bit more ambiguous. Essentially, this feels a lot more Warcrafty than Mists of Pandaria did. The themes of this expansion, I think they click really well with what Blizzard is good at. The overall theme also just feels a lot more in line with the Warcraft franchise as a whole. Mists of Pandaria didn't feel that Warcrafty to me, apart from maybe some moments. Its style was, I suppose, good in its own right, but it felt kind of disconnected and shoehorned in. And I don't mean disconnected in terms of, you know, comparing to the rest of the game, but just in comparison to what Blizzard is generally good at doing in terms of art and story and all that stuff. Though that said, certainly Pandaria did have some really, really pretty places. They were just juxtaposed by the dull, green, foresty swamp places. Ugh, not fun. Anyway, so moving on to Warlords though, the main theme is something along the lines of suicide mission to fight off the big enemy army of evil dudes in a heroic fashion, which I suppose does kind of limit the scope of the expansion's lore. It's not a particularly high and mighty topic, but it does have this really positive effect on the storytelling, the characters, and the overall setting. It's something that Blizzard can sort of, you know, they've not bitten off more than they can chew. It all feels very refined and something that Blizzard is just, I suppose, quite comfortable with doing. Maybe in Pandaria they try to go too high concept-y, maybe they try to lift too many bits of like Chinese history and things like that, and some of the stuff just felt a little bit forced, maybe not natural, not fitting within the world, whereas the stuff that goes on in Warlords of Draenor just feels very Warcraft-ish. A lot of the key plot moments, and even just some of the key things that you do while you're questing, just feel as if they fit within the overall Warcraft aesthetic far better than some of the Pandaria stuff, which is a really good thing. I know this point has been a bit of a rambly mess, it's kind of hard to articulate a feeling, but I just think that this is something that you're really going to notice once you get some time in the game. Personally, for me, the Warcraft feeling that I got sort of started to diminish after Cataclysm. I'm not too sure exactly what it was that changed, but it just seems like they've kind of turned the ship and now they're steering in the right direction. And it wasn't a small turn, no, they've turned that ship pretty darn hard. I mean, just the 180 flip and how Warcrafty and just cool things are is really quite startling. So this is, I think, certainly something to look forward to. Next, let's talk about raids, specifically raid linearity. Now, just before we get into that, the raids are still awesome, there's a lot of cool bosses and all that stuff is essentially as you would expect, but I think that one of the largest drawbacks of Mists of Pandaria was how linear Throne of Thunder and Siege of Orgrimmar were. These are both raids that I had a lot of fun in, but the linearity was such a major drag for me. This was especially prevalent in Siege of Orgrimmar, and it's basically all but killed my enthusiasm with bothering for going in again. I mean, if I have to kill that Kor'kron Dark Shaman trash one more time, I think I will go slightly insane. In fact, for some reason, the whole of Wing 2 is just a massive drag for me. Yeah, but anyway, what I find is that long linear raids really do grind down groups. The more you progress, really the harder it is to continue progressing before you run out of time before the end of the week, so yeah, progress might be really fun and snappy with the first few bosses, but by the time you're attempting, say, Siegecrafter, well, it's going to take you a while to even get to Siegecrafter, and by the time you maybe get a few attempts in, guess what? The week's over. And that's something that I think is really detrimental to the longevity of a raid. The difficulty in progressing through later bosses, in my opinion, should near 100% be due to their harder mechanics, not because you have to face them with only one day left before the weekly reset. And while you can extend the lockout, I think there are rather clear loot reasons for not doing so. So overall, it's just kind of not a nice system, and I really did notice that within my own personal raid group, this is something that kind of didn't help, we bled people. I mean, personally, I got busy and I had to step back from raiding, and the same thing seems to have happened to a few. Yeah, it's a bit of a problem. Now, let's just jump back to Wrath of the Lich King. Back in ICC, you would always fight the same 4 bosses at the start, but after that, you would have a lot of options that would open up. This would allow groups to target whatever boss they wanted for whatever reason they wanted. Maybe people just didn't feel like killing boss X, maybe they had some loot they wanted from boss Y, well guess what, you can go and do that. This freedom meant that for much of the progression you had the opportunity to break things up, and based on whatever the hell people wanted. I think that's far more sustainable than trudging through the same set of bosses in the same order every week, week in, week out, same order, same dudes. That's really grinds on you after a while. Especially when a lot of those bosses end up being useless after a while, and, maybe you have to kill 4 or 5 bosses just to get to the one that your group cares about. If Rotface's loot, for an example, was of no use, and that was fine, you could always hop over to another boss that would help your progression more. Things are a lot better in Warlords of Draenor, that's the main point here. Both Highmaul and Blackrock Foundry have a lot of choice. Highmaul's layout is essentially rather, well, if you've raided Firelands, it'll be sort of familiar to you. And then also Blackrock Foundry is sort of similar to ICC, in that you kind of kill wings, which unlocks the final little, last 2 boss sort of area thing. Now, if they do another linear raid, then I really hope they allow us to teleport from wing to wing or something like that. I remember in the past they talked about an idea where you could essentially attune yourself to a boss after you'd killed it a number of times, and then you could teleport yourself to that boss. I haven't actually heard them talk about that, so I'm assuming it's not going to be a thing, at least with the launch raids in Warlords of Draenor. That's fine though, because these are decently non-linear, but if there was to be a linear raid, then I think they would certainly need to implement that feature. Still though, on the whole, I think this is really good, and it's going to bode really well for the first raid tier of Warlords of Draenor. Let's just hope they keep it up. World of Warcraft is coming up on 10 years of age, and that's just live. If you think about it, World of Warcraft was really kind of made in 2003 and 2, so it definitely is a pretty old game. And what's nice is the leap in fidelity in Warlords of Draenor, and it really is pretty massive this time around. Of course, from expansion to expansion, they have generally made the game look better, but for Warlords, they've made a particularly big leap, which is great. So for me, the most noticeable thing is probably the zones and the dungeons. Just about everything looks better, including both the quality of the textures and then of course the models which they are applied to. The team's ability to construct cool stuff has also came a long way, and after all, the quality of the art assets, which by the way are really good, well, they don't mean much if the environmental artists can't put them together well. One thing that's definitely happened is that the experience of the environmental artists is definitely something that's noticeable here. The zones are just masterfully crafted, all the little settlements are just crammed full of detail, and it's all really well placed. And when you look at, say, even just the rocky outcropping, the texture work on it is better and more believable than it ever has been before, which is really, really good to see. Another thing that really struck me is how nice the skyboxes are, especially in Shadowmoon Valley and Frostfire Ridge. And then there are also just some nice smaller changes. For an example, grass now sways when you walk through it, and they've also improved many of the spell effects and sound effects in the game. This essentially covers everything from many different spells to things like, say, the Hunter's Gun. One thing that I particularly found to be quite nice is the noise of a blacksmith's forge, and then also fire. Just a wood fire, it sounds really good. It's like really crackly and warm. Whatever sound effect they've got. So yeah, overall, the general quality of like the Foley that they've been using for a lot of things is very good. Then, of course, we've got the new character models. These really are a massive improvement over the old ones. I think you really notice it in terms of the animations for various things, and then also the facial expressions. That stuff's all really good, though there's perhaps one or two models which I'm not very happy about, like, say, the running animation on the Night Elf male. But for the most part, they are really good. And actually, one hidden benefit of these new character models is what they've done to the in-game cinematics. It's just given that team better assets to use, and overall, it's just really nice. It's something that really was long due. I mean, we think about these models being 10 years old, but in fact, they're probably 13 years old, or maybe even more, because this game was in development, obviously before it came out, before that 10-year mark. Overall, these increases in fidelity are just paired with a fantastic artistic direction that I think is really some of the strongest yet. So because of all this stuff, it just really nails the feel of Warcraft, and also advances the Warcraft aesthetic while still kind of retaining its heart. The game just feels really, really good from an aesthetic perspective, and the overall increase in fidelity really does help that. Customization is generally pretty awesome, but the good news is that in Warlords of Draenor, they've really ramped up the gameplay customization. Now, in my opinion, gameplay customization is by far the most important kind of customization, so it's really great that that's been catered for. Now, first of all, let's talk about the outpost system. This does allow for a lot of choice. Basically, whenever you first enter a zone via the main story, you get a choice between building 2 buildings, and each building will give you a powerful ability or buff that is usually combat related. For an example, in Talador, you will be able to choose between calling down artillery or a magical orb that will float around you in AoE nearby enemies. These are both really useful while you're leveling, but more importantly, they're also useful in those level 100 zones, or well, sub-zones that I was talking about earlier. So this is a meaningful choice that basically affects your whole big wad of gameplay. It really is good. Then also the medium and large garrison buildings have usually got some sort of impact on your gameplay as well. They provide lots of things, including powerful buffs, daily quests, and the ability to earn unique rewards. An example is, say, the Dwarven Bunker. While it doesn't give you any specific line of daily quests, what it does do is it lets you pick up scraps of armor from dead orcs, and you can turn those scraps in to get some Transmog gear. Another example is the Stables, which will give you a series of daily quests, which ultimately will result in you getting 6 new mounts that are all really cool. It's definitely great to see, actually. Now overall, I think have just realized how important the ability to customize your gameplay is, and overall they've just really nailed it. These buildings and outposts have a direct and noticeable impact on how you play the game, resulting them in being sort of fun, important, and meaningful choices that do genuinely feel rewarding. And that really is important. Of course, I think that it would have been nice if there was more aesthetic customization of your garrison. There is a little bit of that, but I think more would be nicer. though overall gameplay customization is more important than just making something a little bit more shiny. Alright, so this next point is actually something that I'm personally pretty happy about. It's really one of the improvements that I am the most happy about in this expansion, even though it's not necessarily to do with the gameplay. Now, it is the storytelling and the character work, and while I have mentioned this a few times, I think it's very pertinent to this list, so I will repeat these points quickly here. The character work in Warlords of Draenor is fantastic in comparison to what we have seen in prior expansions. New characters are really well introduced, and even known characters like Duratan and Khadgar are basically new as far as their in-game portrayal, writing, and voice acting goes. Also, on the topic of writing and voice acting, well, the quality of that stuff is far superior to much of Blizzard's past work, which is just really great because sometimes we had cringy writing. Another thing that's really good is the character arcs are generally well constructed, and key parts of them are emphasized by very on-point voice acting and some excellent in-game cinematics. You also stick with a familiar cast of characters as you go through the leveling experience. So essentially you have this little intro thing that's about 45 minutes long, and you will meet the main players in Warlords of Draenor during that, and they are essentially the people that you will be staying with for most of the leveling up. I think this is really great because it gives the important characters a lot more room to grow, and it also ties each zone into a cohesive story quite well. Now, a potential problem with this would be, of course, reliving the Cataclysm Green Jesus problem, but they haven't met that problem, essentially. It always feels like us working with the story's main kind of characters, and not us working for them. I'm not too sure exactly how they have done that, but in general, it just feels like, I don't know, it feels better. It's not like the whole Thrall situation. You'll probably notice it once you actually get the game. Now, another thing is that the story is not massively ambitious, but it is well told. Again, this sort of harkens one of my prior points in that it feels like story-wise they've not bitten off more than they can chew. They've bitten off the right amount, and it's something they can deal with very effectively. The improvements to the quest flow also mean that the pace of the story is not broken by mountains of dull filler quests. Generally, you are, if you're doing a thing, then you're given a good plot reason to do it, and that's pretty much always voice acted, which, again, is really good. The voice acting just adds context to every little tiny action that you do, even if it's just killing some dudes and picking up a few arrows off the ground. Overall, the storytelling is just far more effective, and hopefully this is an example of a storytelling framework that could be used in future expansions to just continue this excellent level of storytelling that I've really been enjoying. Another great thing that they've done in this expansion is they have basically made it so that gearing for non-raiders, and I suppose just general gearing at the start of the expansion, is a lot better. And yeah, this is a really nice thing. So not everyone likes to raid, not everyone likes to be sort of forced through LFR every week for the sake of getting decent gear. Now, a lot of people would go through LFR and Mists of Pandaria because they wanted better gear. And a lot of people would say, well, if you don't raid, why the hell do you want the gear? Well, here's a few reasons. A, it generally looks cool. B, it's a goal to strive for. And C, that gear is still useful in the outdoor world and when you're soloing old content and doing dungeons and all that stuff. Previously, these people would have had to grind out Mists of Pandaria LFRs, or just play the super fun Burdens of Eternity game, which, by the way, was not super fun. No, screw that system. Now then, one of the things with MoP LFRs is that they were balanced to essentially be a thing that you would do every week. That's how they did loot. Well, in Warlords of Draenor, one nice point that's definitely worth mentioning is that LFR loot will actually be at a decently high drop rate. Now, to counteract that, it won't be tier gear in terms of its art or set bonus, but it will still be item level 640 and I think 650 for Blackrock Foundry. Like, it'll still be powerful gear, and it will drop a lot faster, so that is one improvement. However, the main thing that I'm happy about is how they have improved variation. You can craft LFR quality gear from your garrison's profession buildings, even if you are not a crafter. You'll be able to mine ore from the garrison mine, and you'll be able to get leatherworking materials via the barn, even if you're not a miner or a skinner. Now, of course, the best stuff is only available to those with the professions, but still, this is another way of getting gear. Then there's also the Apex's crystal gear that I mentioned. And this stuff, starts being cheap dungeon quality gear, but eventually can be upgraded to the point where it's better than Blackrock Foundry LFR gear, though that would take a lot of time and work. These crystals are actually obtained by quite a decent variety of things. You can do those level 100 daily mission thingies, there's also follower missions, garrison invasions, and I'm sure one or two other ways of getting them, which is pretty good. Then there are also challenge modes which offer really good gear, so players who don't have the time to raid but still want to do rewarding yet challenging content will have an option. Also, garrison missions will also gear you up, albeit rather slowly. Then of course there's also world bosses and rare mobs to get gear from. Overall, this is a far more varied system than what we had with Mists of Pandaria, and I think that the chances for people to actually just get gear by doing content that they find enjoyable is going to be a lot higher in Warlords than it will have been in Mists of Pandaria. Another excellent thing in Warlords is the questing. They have actually done a great job with how this is handled. Now, Blizzard are always iterating from expansion to expansion on the quest system. However, Warlords of Draenor represents the single largest leap in quality for the questing. First of all, what they've really managed to do is focus the quest lines into a single main story quest that spans the zone, but they've managed to do this without making it feel highly linear in the Cataclysm sense of things. Now, as well as having these main quests, there are also plenty of side quest chains and things like that. These often tell their own really fun, well voice acted story, and it's basically just a little bonus that you might find, nestled off in some settlement in the other side of the zone. It really does work out quite well. Now, they've also pared down the amount of filler quests. Generally, if you see an exclamation mark in Warlords of Draenor, then you'll be going off to do something that is interesting and generally related to the plot. I think that sometimes, they would nearly slow down the story for the sake of having a few more filler quests to pad out the experience. That didn't really result in engaging gameplay that felt like you were progressing a lot. It just, it made things a bit of a doldrum, really. So it's nice that that's certainly been, pretty much fixed. Now, the quests also stick to the strength of WoW, and overall this means that the pace is quest fast, especially in comparison to Mists of Pandaria. You will level up a bit faster, but also you'll be hopping from zone to zone, I think a bit faster as well, and they definitely benefit from having a total of 10 levels. It just means you're dinging more per unit time, and I suppose that's something that feels gratifying, so it's totally a good thing. Now, another thing that they've done with zones is they have added these little side objectives. Basically, you will see a icon on your map, kind of Timeless Isles-ish style in a way, and when you go to that icon, you will get a whole bunch of bonus objectives, and these will just pop up in your little sidebar thingy, and they will be simple enough. It'll just be kill a few things, collect a few things, but what these essentially are is an optional thing that you can do in lieu of a side quest, or maybe in lieu of doing a certain part of the story quest or something. It's a little bit more freedom. Personally, I don't find these to be particularly engaging, but I suppose it's better to have those things there in an unobtrusive manner that's completely optional rather than not having them be there at all. There are also, I suppose, a bunch of one-off little side quests, and these are literally just a quest. It's maybe one or two sort of stages long, and they can tell these just nice little tiny mini stories, and you often find these scattered around the side objective zones. Overall, though, this works really well, and the quest flow is just far more enjoyable. I find it far more palatable than the Mists of Pandaria stuff, and even though I've leveled through Warlords of Draenor multiple times on the beta, I'm still kind of looking forward to doing it again on live with my characters that, matter because they're not beta characters, it'll be wiped. Another thing that I think will give Warlords of Draenor a bit of a leg up on Pandaria is that the 5.0 problem is essentially all gone. They do not gate things like ultra-important recipes and gear behind reputations. And now this is really brilliant news because I'm sure many of us had bad experiences with the way that stuff was done in patch 5.0. So instead of that, we get a whole bunch of new systems. I think one of the main ones is the single daily quest thingy that they do. This essentially sends you off to a level 100 part of a zone. Basically every zone in the game has now got a level 100 area. In Draenor anyway, so it sends you there. You need to fill up a progress bar by killing mobs, rares, and clicking on various items and doing things like that. Now, each of these level 100 zones or sub-zones is basically a miniature Timeless Isle. You also, on top of that, get a special story quest every week, and these are mostly randomized in a kind of start, middle, and end, but yeah, the stuff in between's a little bit random. It's essentially a beefed up version of patch 5.1. Now, what you get from these is Apexis crystals, and they will get you gear, so I suppose, some, a element of gear is behind this stuff, but you see, one of the biggest problems with 5.0 is they gave you all these dailies, which all had a benefit, but then they took away the daily quest limit, which meant that the level of dailies that people, or just the amount that people were going to be doing, was insane. And things are a lot more manageable in Draenor, and this is really something I'll touch on another point, but there's a lot more variation in how you get gear, so having some powerful stuff behind Apex's crystals isn't really a massive problem, purely because there are other methods of getting gear. Now, in addition to this, with, the daily, quest thingies, there's also a lot of gameplay associated with the many facets of the garrison, Ashran, the better dungeons, hunting rares, doing garrison invasions, and overall this should lead to a endgame sort of gameplay that at least is a lot more sustainable than patch 5.0. Oh, and one other thing is that the level 3 garrison plans, which do require quite a bit of effort to unlock, are actually available across all of your characters. This avoids that problem in Pandaria where, say, I don't know, you had a leather worker that needed Golden Lotus rep. Well, that was fine, but if that leather worker was your ult, then you'd have to do all those reps all over again. It was even worse if it was one of those reps like the August Celestials that was gated behind getting Golden Lotus rep. I mean, come on, who thought that was a good idea? So yeah, all this stuff is essentially, if not fixed, it's a lot better than it used to be. Okay, let's just step away from the gameplay for a second and talk about performance optimizations. This is a decently important point, actually. Now, despite the increase in the graphical quality, they've actually managed to get the game to run quite a bit smoother. I've consistently found that I'm getting higher frame rates on the beta than I do on live. They've also added a really cool feature which lets people use different graphical settings in raids and battlegrounds. All this stuff is essentially really good for people who suffer from low performance in large groups, and I know that while this isn't really a point that particularly matters to me a lot, it's something that's going to be important to a lot of people on the whole. I know that loads of people play WoW on laptops, you're doing it wrong, and also play it on maybe old computers, in which case, by the way, just, upgrade, it'll be awesome. But yeah, still, maybe, there's situations where maybe you can't afford an upgrade for your computer, or maybe you're traveling a lot and can't afford a big, beefy gamey laptop. So for a lot of people, this is going to be really good. And it's also going to be something that's going to affect everything. So I'm sure that even if you have got a really nice computer, someone in your raid doesn't. And maybe that's the person in your raid who is not performing well because they're playing at like 10 frames a second. We actually had a healer once who was playing at 6 frames a second. Of course, we didn't know this until we finally found out, and I think she really, after that, got a new laptop or something. But still, I think there's going to be a lot of just issues with people messing up because of bad hardware that may actually be fixed. Another thing that they've done, which will hopefully improve performance and also just reduce visual clutter, is that they've toned down the spell effects for other people in battlegrounds and raids. This is just really nice, especially for the melee people, because you could hardly even see your own character. There was just so many bells and whistles going on. Well, now it should be a lot more readable. Though, of course, in things like arenas, all the spell effects will be present because obviously those spell effects are really important in terms of your decision-making process. So yeah, there you go. There's just been a bunch of nice little performance optimizations that should help the whole lot of us out in some way. Okay, so another great thing is Ashran. Now, this is actually the 11th point in this video. Yeah, I decided to do 1 or 2 more after I recorded the main stuff. But yeah, Ashran's actually pretty cool. Now, maybe it's not my cup of tea in every instance, but I think what is cool about Ashran, and what is certainly better than the Miss of Pandaria situation, is that at least Ashran kind of exists. We went from Wintergrasp to Tul Barad to nothing, and then Ashran popped up. So I suppose by at least existing, it does do quite a lot of good. Now, personally, I do find Ashran to be quite a bit more fun than Tul Barad. But, a bit of the fantasy of, say, Wintergrasp is not there with Ashran, I'd certainly say. But for what it is, I suppose it is rather cool. And from what I hear, a lot of PvP people, the mainline PvP people, really do enjoy it. For me, it's just the fact that it's, Zergy gameplay and stuff like that. I just don't really enjoy that stuff as much. But hey, it's a cool way to just kill some time, and I suppose it is a method of killing time and getting rewards that was not there in Miss of Pandaria, so really it is better. Alright, bonus point number 2. There's a cross-faction auction house. Now, yes, this might not blow loads of people away, but from my perspective as someone with a passing interest in the auction house, this is actually really nice. I think that it could make a more vibrant economy on many servers, and I think especially people on unbalanced servers on the low population side will, well, have a far greater opportunity to make money via the auction house. And then for people on balanced servers, well, you're overall going to have a greater economy, which is shifting more volume, and I think as that scale increases, there are perhaps some more opportunities for people to do well. Of course, there's more competition, but with more competition comes more demand. So yeah, I think it's just going to add a bit more speed to the auction house game. If there's more money being traded day in, day out, then I suppose your time spent on the auction house could be rewarded a little bit more. Alright then, point number 13, the legendary quest. So they've actually learned quite a few, really, things from the MoP legendary quest, and in general Blizzard have said that they're not going to be forcing people to do PvP for it, and they are going to bear things in mind when it comes to getting sigils and marks and all those various things that they usually ask us to get. Now, currently what we know about the legendary quest in terms of solid information is the very first part of it. Essentially, I think up to the end of High Mall, and for that, by the way, don't worry, no story spoilers, but what you actually have to do for that is get a thing from the end boss of all the heroic dungeons. I think it's all of them anyway, and I think that's pretty cool, actually. It gets people to go out and do slightly more challenging content for a pretty cool reward at the end. And it's not like you're just running through a raid or something for, a million times just trying to get sigils of something. My big hope, and I suppose also worry, is that they hopefully won't, but also might, just do the same thing they did with, like, Secrets of the Empire and Mogu Runes of Fate. I did not enjoy that mechanic. Personally, I thought it was overly grindy, and one issue is that, you ended up just, like, it wasn't your progression in killing the final boss or killing whatever that got you your reward. It was just going again and again and again and again and again, and then killing the final boss once. I just don't think that was as fun. So I'd say they should definitely time it so that if they are going to do drops or something like that, only make it a few weeks, because I just didn't like the craziness of the MoP legendary quest. At the very least, we've got some positive evidence, and we do know that their intentions are at least better, and it sounds like they've learned from their mistakes, so hopefully that will continue to be the case. I'm not really sure whether I should include this as a reason why Warlords of Draenor is going to be better than Mists of Pandaria, because there maybe are one or two pitfalls, but I think one pretty cool thing about Warlords for the vast majority of people is going to be how you get gold. You see, gold's actually going to be a reward for more things. They're removing Valor points, and that essentially is going to change things up quite a bit. So for an example, if you do a heroic dungeon, then your reward is going to be gold. I think it's currently 70 gold on the beta, no idea if it's going to stay like that. LFR wings will reward gold, but then again we'll also have the increased drop rate for gear. And overall, even if you look at your garrison, you're going to have more opportunities to make gold there. Now, none of this is going to make you millions of gold, I need to make that very clear. And the top tier profession items are at least still, they're still tied to actually having those professions. However, I would perhaps argue that they've given too much profession-related power to the garrisons. But anyway, I digress. There is going to be a just higher gold acquisition for the regular average Joe. Not everyone needs to be a millionaire, but being able to afford something nice every now and then, I suppose, would be pretty cool. Now, in terms of the overall economy, well, it's very hard to predict how things will actually end up. I know that a lot of major, World of Warcraft gold-making community member people, like, say, Elvine, have said that it's pretty hard to predict what's going to go on exactly. So I don't know what the effect is going to be like for the big gold-making people, but I suppose if you take a larger look at things, there's a very small number of them in comparison to the amount of people that play the game, and perhaps this is the sort of thing that is for the good of the game overall. I don't know. It's hard to say, but I think this could end up being a nice thing. Certainly, I think there are a lot of people who are going to be happy that they can actually get some gold from a way that doesn't involve just sitting there grinding mobs, grinding veins of ore, or just sitting on the auction house, because that's gameplay that not everyone enjoys. Alright, so here we are at the 15th point, and I'm just going to use this to cover two small little topics. So first of all, Transmog is a little bit better in Warlords of Draenor. Now, they are planning a Transmog overhaul, which is basically akin to you unlocking an appearance once you get an item rather than having to deal with the whole void storage stuff. But since that's not going to be there in 6.0, I'm not going to cover it in this video. What is nice about the Transmog and Warlords though, is that some of the garrison buildings actually give you some really cool looks. and it feels like they have really started to design around this being a compelling vanity reward for people. So from the Dwarven Bunker / Horde equivalent place, you can get Transmog armor that resembles either a Stormwind Guard or a Orgrimmar Grunt, and then you can get stuff that resembles all the various orc clans of Draenor. That is really cool. Also, the Salvage Yard will let you get some of the character selection screen armor as well. I think that's a really nice feature, and there's also, I think, some Shatari, whatever, however the hell it's called. Those Shatrath Draenei guys, you can get their armor from a rep, and you can also get the Laughing Skull orc armor from a rep. I just think that stuff's really cool. And yeah, it's just nice to see more Transmog stuff getting a bit of love from Blizzard. And then finally, one last little thing that I want to mention really quickly, it's not large enough for its own point, is the stat squish. In terms of DPS anyway, it feels way nicer to be doing kind of high teens DPS rather than doing, I don't know, 400 and something thousand. There was just too many zeros there. It was unreadable, and this is just far more clean and nice. So there you go, that's basically it for the list. Well, there you go, 10 reasons why I think that Warlords of Draenor is indeed going to be better than Mists of Pandaria. And while I overall do think that is the case, Warlords of Draenor is not perfect, and there are probably going to be a few little pitfalls here and there. The goal for next Tuesday's video is to highlight those pitfalls, and hopefully maybe give some feedback or suggestions as to how they could be avoided. But for now, that's it. Thank you very much for watching. Let me know what you're looking forward to in the expansion in the comments, and I'll see you next time.